But we all know pensions are important, but let's be honest, some of us think they're a bit dull, which is why, in general, we're not that great at planning for our retirement. Less than half of us are in a workplace pension scheme, and once you strip out the public sector, that falls to a third. Add the uncertainty about and the mistrust of the financial markets, and you can see why Britain has what's commonly referred to as a pensions crisis. But who's really affected by it, and can government do anything about it? David Thompson reports.
I don't know what does go through your mind when you're working on the roof of Covent Garden Market, but I'd be willing to bet it's probably not your pension plan.
When people talk about the pensions crisis, you tend to think about the current generation of older folk and worry whether they've got enough to get by on. But very generally speaking, if there is going to be a crisis, it's not them that's got the problem. It's us.
Individuals who reached the state pension age in the last 10 years or so actually received more generous state pensions than any of their predecessors or indeed their successors are likely to receive. They may also have done relatively well out of occupational pensions and therefore they may be less of a concern. Where there are more concerns potentially are younger individuals, those who perhaps won't be getting as generous a promise from the state, those who are less likely to have access, if they're private sector employees, into a decent workplace pension scheme.
The evidence suggests people have lost faith in pensions. In the private sector, only a third of employees are in a workplace scheme, and that does seem to be backed up by the word on the street.
We're just asking people, do you have a pension?
Yes, I do. I have two.
Two? And you're quite confident they're going to pay out what you hope they're going to pay out?
Do you know what? I've got absolutely no idea.
Do you have a pension?
No, I don't.
Have you got a pension?
Nope.
Have you thought about getting one?
Yes. I thought that I'm not going to.
Yeah, why not?
Because I don't earn enough money to pay into one.
Planning for retirement involves lots and lots of uncertainties. The government wants to be able to promise everybody £140 a week state pension in retirement, but we've seen previous government promises over pensions change, so people don't know what the state's going to give them. Clearly there's nothing certain about stock market investments and annuity rates in the future, so people don't know how much saving now will actually deliver them in their retirement. They also don't know how their needs and their incomes might change going forwards, and they don't, for example, know for sure when they will retire.
So, what to do? Well, from October, the government begins its auto-enrolment scheme for people without a pension. Most employees aged 22 plus will have around 4% of their salary put aside for their retirement, although they can opt out. That'll be matched by contributions from employers and by tax relief. But has it been thought through?
Around the table, discussing how this will work going forward, we've had employers, we've had pension providers, we've had financial services, but we haven't had the employees and the future pensioners, and it's their attitude and their interests that really are at stake.
And that's the thing. Pensions, frankly, will never be fun, but they are vital if you want to go out on a high, which is why we and the government simply have to get our sums right.
David Thompson reporting there, and Ros Altman is still with us, and we've been joined by the Pensions Minister, Steve Webb. Welcome to the programme again. Ros Altman, what do you think the current economic climate is like at the moment for pensioners?
For pensioners,
yes,
there is a big divide. There are some that are reasonably well off, but that's a small minority. Over half of pensioners have an income of less than £10,000 a year, so clearly they are not very well placed. And then there's a middle group who've done some saving and who are trying to live on what they've accumulated during their lifetime, and they're struggling because of the effects of monetary policy. You know, don't have much income from their savings. Quantitative easing has decimated annuity rates. Inflation has been created by quantitative easing, and that's all hitting that middle group.
So what do you say, having laid those out, the difficulties for those pensioners in that group, what do you say to the claim that actually pensioners in general have been cushioned from the government's austerity measures?
I just think that's missing the impact that many of the middle income pensioners have felt. Yes, the very poorest pensioners on state benefits have had their benefits increased, although not by as much as the pensioner inflation they've faced has gone up.
Because many of them just kept up with inflation, haven't they?
Well, they haven't even kept up with that, because we've just done CPI instead of the pensioner retail price index. But in addition to that, there are those people who are just above the state pension, who've got some savings from their lifetime's hard work of putting money aside, which is what we've all been asked to do. And they've been hit quite hard by monetary policy, rather than just fiscal policy. Yes, the winter fuel allowance was cut this year.
And there are other universal benefits too that pensioners get when the government has been looking at universal benefits affecting other parts of the population. I mean, there is this sort of picture building up that older generations to some extent have benefited, that there are well-off pensioners who have done well out of property prices, haven't paid tuition fees, whatever it is. Build up this picture, and in the current times, some of that pain needs to be shared because the younger generations are suffering arguably more with no unemployment and not able to buy a house.
I find that argument deeply troubling because it doesn't fit with the real world. Yes, there is the top 10% or 20% at most of pensioners who've got good final salary pension schemes from their lifetime's work and who are reasonably well off. And then there are the very poorest end who are kind of on benefits. But there's a group in the middle that are really not well off. Only 3% of this age group went to university in the first place, so that's not really relevant.
Well, let's put that to Steve Webb. You basically haven't done enough for that important middle group who have got some income, and you're making them suffer.
Well, Ros is right that the pensioner population is so diverse. To talk about pensioners as a big sort of homogeneous group.
But let's look at that big group that does have, you know, does pay income tax, that does have income, let's say, over £10,500. Why have you hit that group?
Well, in fact, that's a group that will substantially benefit from the triple lock on the state pension. So it goes up every year now by the highest of earnings, inflation, or 2.5%. And someone retiring this year on a full basic pension will get an extra £15,000 over the course of their retirement because of that policy, you know, reversing 30 years of a falling pension. That's a huge commitment when there isn't any money to be had.
Have you been surprised by the backlash in the press and by commentators generally at the policy of freezing age-related personal tax allowances?
I think we'd all accept it could have been presented better. But I want to just drill this in with Ros, because imagine you're on £15,000 a year and working. You've got to pay income tax, national insurance and your mortgage out of that £15,000. If you're retired, you've probably paid your mortgage off if you're of that sort of income level. You don't have to pay national insurance. So is it right that those two people, the working age person, pays more tax than the retired person? And what the Chancellor is saying, they should be the same. And that's, now, we could have presented it better, but as a destination, I think that's probably fair.
Is that right, Ros?
The problem is, first of all, that the budget last year specifically promised that the age-related allowance would go up with retail prices, not consumer prices. So a promise was broken, no acknowledgement of it. The second issue here is that you've taken something away from that particular group who saved. They are the ones who would pay tax, and they're not well off because if they've got more than 24,000, they don't benefit from the age-related allowance. So it makes sense to have a uniform tax system.
Yeah, and that's all we're heading towards.
The Office for Tax Simplification recommended that you do something on the other side to make it up to some of the people who would lose out, because you don't want those coming up for retirement to think, well, I'm just going to get hit if I save, so I'm not going to bother.
And that's where the state pension reform comes in, that I think we see pretty much the same way, that if we can get the basic state pension above all of this means testing that Ros is talking about, then people who do make the sacrifice, who do save, will know they're better off as a result, and that's the key.
But you admit the golden days for pensioners are over?
Well, we've found out that this year is the peak for company pension income. From this year onwards, occupational pension incomes are going to start to fall, and we need to replace that, which is where in your film, this business of getting 10 million people in work, starting to save, with the firm putting money in and the government putting money in, has got to be the answer, and that's going to be a revolution.
Did you talk to employees about that? Because obviously you talk to the pensions industry and you talk to companies who want to make it as cheap as possible. The pensions industry don't want competition.
Yeah.
Why didn't you talk to employees about what they wanted?
We did, massively, because this thing needs to fly. Well, not just organisations. We've talked to lots of individuals. They represent employees. I mean, they are the big... but we talk to, as it were, the collective organisation, because when people are enrolled into a workplace pension, we want them to stay in. So we've had to talk to people who are working and say, what will make you stay in? What will make you opt out? And the key thing is the employer is putting money in. If you save under the mattress or some other way...
Are they putting in enough? The key is that a lot of the complaint is we're going to have to pay more as employees. The employers aren't going to put in enough. It's not worth it, because in the end we're not going to get enough out of it.
Well, we've put a floor in, so there's a minimum amount the employer has to put in. And getting these people into a pension from 0 up to 8% would be a fantastic step in the right direction.
I mean, the criticism is that the government keeps changing the goalposts, you know, speeding up the increase in pension age, pension provision, you know, introduction of career average schemes. You keep changing. People just think, I don't know what to do. Do you accept that?
There has been a lot of change, and one of the things I've tried to do, you know, being a pensions minister for 2 years is almost a world record. And what I've tried to do is...
You must be close to retirement,
well,
Steve.
I don't tell the Prime Minister that. But we've tried to say, where are we going with pensions long term, and try and make sure all these changes that we have to make fit so people know where we're going, and that's the key.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve Webb, for joining us, and, of course, Ros.